come those times in life where you have some important conversations with your kids. You might call them milestone conversations. Today on Life Talks, that's what we're going to be discussing is when to have these milestone conversations and how do you have them. I'm Ben. I'm here with Dan. We're the teaching pastors at Life Fellowship Church. Dan, this was your idea. I think it's a great idea because I think a lot of times we think of the small, we're trying to think of the small conversations, but every once in a while there are these milestones in a kid's development and upbringing that you want to sit down and say, hey, here's something you need to understand.
Yeah.
So why did you think of this idea?
Well, I'm a list maker. I live my life by lists, and I think it's important, to almost always be formulating and curating and prioritizing topics that you want to get said before your children get educated by somebody else or leave the ability, for you to have these meaningful conversations as they get older.
Yeah.
And so I have a list that I've made of key things, key principles, key values, key warnings that I wanted to have with my kids. And I pretty much got through them over the course of their lifetime. But now because I teach family discipleship, I'm actually requiring my students to be thinking in advance. What are things you want to be doing? What are objectives you want to see met so that we have a plan? If, a failure to plan is a plan for failure. And so there ought to be at least a roadmap. It won't always be perfect and we won't accomplish everything on it that we want, but it'll certainly get us headed in the right direction and we'll go further than we would if we had none at all.
Yeah, I think this is such a great idea because even before we turn on the microphones, the three of us were in here, we were talking about things that, things that happened to us, we said, we wish that our parents had said something before we experienced these things. And so I think that's just a really important idea to remember as parents is that preparation, that investment in them. There are times where you have to be ahead of the game a little bit,
And that speaks to intentionality.
Yeah.
I think probably for most people, if you say, what are the big talks that you should have with your children? Number one on the list is the birds and the bees talk, and then number two, they can't think of one. Because first of all, the birds and the bees talk is so traumatic for both the parent and the child that it often gets delayed past the point when it's effective at all.
Yeah, your kids look like, really? Seriously?
Yeah, I learned about that 5 years ago. But there are so many other conversations, and that's a big one. It is an important one.
Absolutely, 100%.
And actually, many of these conversations should not occur just once, and that's going to be one of the things that I try to emphasize, that these are repeatable conversations that need to be reinforced as the child matures, as they gather more information, and as they have more experiences.
Yeah. So this list of milestone conversations, did you break them up according to age, or how did you break them up?
Well, just for the sake of order, yeah, I actually did. I have like preschool age, and some of this comes from, if you're familiar with classical education, there are basically three primary stages in a child's life. It's called the pulperet, the pert, and the poetic. And the pulperet is the one that up through about 7 years of age. By the way, a child's character is largely formed by the conclusion of that. Your kids are hardening their values far sooner than most people realize. And then they kind of transition. They're receiving. They learn by rote memorization. They learn their ABCs, their times tables, and A says as an apple, all those things before the age of 7, between the ages of 7 and about the onset of puberty. And that age changes a little bit, but early puberty at the end of that level is the poetic age. This is when they start asking questions. They start asking why. They start looking for the boundaries in their life. They push back a little bit more aggressively with a little more thought and planning. A toddler throws a tantrum, whereas an 11-year-old plots because they're capable of more sophisticated things. And you can start developing their higher order thinking skills, their discernment skills. And then about the age of 14 is that final transition into the poetic. And that is what creative stage. That's when they internalize their values and it affects the affective domain, which is
Mhm.
basically your values,
Hmm.
your priorities, what's important to you. And so the kid shifts from asking questions sometimes to become more introverted and private with their thoughts, but they may express it in music or in poetry
Mhm. Mhm.
or in other ways. A lot of
They question a lot
they
more in that.
question a lot.
Yeah.
And they get a little dark during this
Mhm.
stage, and that's when a lot of them say, "Well, I want to be a counselor," and they're always talking about their problems and their hard times. Well, it's because they're adapting these first few years to the adult world more and more,
Yeah.
and so that poetic stage really is a crucial stage for intentional conversation. So all of this cries for intentionality.
Absolutely. I mean, I think most parents would tell you, "Oh yeah, those are I've seen my own child
Mhm.
develop and have these moments where things shift." And I think your explanation of that, even in social psychology, they talk about these stages of development,
Mhm.
and many of them mirror those
Yeah, I
stages
mean,
you just talked
they
about.
literally, if your kids take a standardized achievement test, there's one up through 4th grade, and there's one from 4th grade to 8th grade, and
Yep.
then there's one for the final.
Yeah.
They literally divide their testing around
Yes.
these 3 domains.
100%. All right.
Yeah.
So give us the list.
All right, so let me start with just age appropriateness is essential,
Mm.
and so don't give the kids more than they need, and also you don't engage a 4-year-old in a 40-minute conversation. Basically, you can use this as a rule of thumb. Your child probably has an attention span equivalent maximum to the number of years old they are in terms of minutes.
That's
So a
good.
5-year-old gets a 5-minute conversation.
Yep.
A 15-year-old may get a 15-minute
Yeah.
conversation, but anything beyond that, either you've got to be a really gifted communicator or you need to break it up into smaller
Yeah.
pieces
Or
because it's just
yeah.
not going to
And
work.
every once in a while you have those kids who are philosophers and they can think a different
Yeah,
level,
yeah,
but
you get this and there's this always this really special moment where the planets align and the mood is just right, and you have this incredibly deep conversation with your kid, like, "Oh man, that was so wonderful! I can't wait to do that again." And next time you try it, they're like, "Shut up! I don't want to talk to you." So take advantage of those rare
yeah.
moments when the doors do swing open.
Yeah.
Drop everything and follow through.
That's
But
good.
in terms of age appropriateness, I start with the preschool. The preschool ones are pretty essential. And the first one is, and a lot of these are just common sense, but sometimes common sense isn't so common. Good touch, bad touch.
Mm.
This is the age in which they're vulnerable to exploitation by
Yep.
adults. We want to teach our children to respect adults, but we also need to teach them that there are limits.
Absolutely.
And so the good touch, bad touch, and the other side of that one, I think it should be a separate conversation, is the stranger danger.
Mm.
So the worst tragedies come whenever someone comes in and says, "I've got a puppy in my van,"
Yeah.
or "Would you like some candy?" And we make the jokes about the guy in the white van driving around, but that's a stereotype because it does happen often enough.
Mhm.
John Gacy in his clown outfits.
Mhm.
You have to be really, really careful that your kids both respect authority and so for our kids there was a code word
Absolutely.
that they had to
Yeah.
have.
Our kids did the same thing.
Yeah, and we don't care who it is. It could be somebody from church. It could be somebody from our neighborhood. If they did not say this word, do not get in the car with
That's
them.
right.
And the idea that no one, not a friend, not a teacher, not anybody should touch you where your swimming
That's
suit
right.
is.
That's right.
And so that becomes a pretty easy thing for them to remember. So those are those early ones that even a child who's 3, 4, 5 years old,
Mhm. Can
we need
understand.
to protect them from that.
Yep.
Then we move up into that the early elementary years. And that's when you're going to first introduce them to death.
Mm.
Sometimes this becomes almost a crisis because they may lose a grandparent.
Mm.
And people are often asking me, well, I've got a 6-year-old and their grandparent just died. Should I take them to the funeral? Should I let them see the body? I don't give a hard answer on that because I think every child is different.
Mhm.
I think I've seen, because, being pastors, we see a lot,
Yeah.
right? I've
Yeah.
seen, where they'll pick up a 4-year-old and ask them to kiss grandpa goodbye in
Oh,
the casket. Don't
gosh.
do that. But so use some wisdom and some discretion on that. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to shelter your kids from even the realities of death. But if they have a goldfish, and Audrey, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry. I think this is hilarious, but my daughter actually was trying to keep her young son from experiencing death. She kept 2 goldfish, She kept one in her closet and one for him because she kept killing the goldfish so she could rotate them out. He
Oh,
wouldn't know. So, Audra, you're gonna kill me for telling this. I'm so sorry, but I just think I would never have thought of that in a bazillion years.
oh
You
my
know,
goodness, that's
so
hilarious.
at some point, it is appropriate for them to experience. Yes,
Death,
everything that's
yes.
born is going to
Hey,
die.
I remember when my gerbil died when I was 8 years old. I mean, it was like,
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it.
And I don't think it's inappropriate then to go through the motions of a funeral. You know,
Yeah.
don't wrap him in newspaper and throw him in the garbage, but you know, put him in a little box, take him outside,
Yeah.
say a little prayer,
Yeah.
all of these things, and help them to. Well, do people ever die?
Yeah.
You know, all people do die,
Yeah.
and this is why we want a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, don't tell them lies. Don't say, well, everybody turns into an angel someday, or sometimes.
Also, don't go into the depths of the institutes of the Christian religion of theology of death. Like, like
you
keep it
dangle above the fires of hell like a spider
like,
on a web.
I mean, just keep it age appropriate. But obviously, it does give you an opportunity to introduce a biblical framework to understand life and death.
Always emphasize the truth and be careful on how you portray God, because I've seen parents say, well, God wanted them home. Well, then they get angry with God because they weren't ready for them to go.
Yeah.
And that's not even good theology.
Don't blame that death on God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another is how to respond to play companions who are trying to get you to do wrong. You know, whether it is, you know, playing doctor like some little children do.
Yeah.
And by the way, in our over-sexualized society, I think sometimes, you know, if you find your 5-year-old playing doctor underneath the stairs with another 5-year-old, understand that you don't have to call the psychologist, and they don't need it, and don't call the police, and don't because kids are curious and they're wondering and they're exploring. You would only take that next step if it shows it unhealthy, or if they're engaging in adult activities that says somebody's been exposed to pornography or something else.
100%.
But the reality, you know, and I'm not trying to be crude, but you show me mine, and I'll show you yours, whatever that little joke that sometimes we say. That's actually pretty normal in child development. And again, because I ran a school for years, you had to face that. It's only when it crosses a line into adult behavior that then you have to get involved, and always get the other parent involved.
That's right.
Never hide it from a parent. But you know, how to teach your child to say no to another child who's trying to get them to do something they know they
100%.
shouldn't.
Yep.
And so another would, and then I think another conversation for strangers is I think this one should be repeated all the time. You know, I think to some extent we've over-responded to that because everybody hears about an abduction. 99% of the abductions you see at Walmart or, you know, on the wall or whatever are custodial issues.
Yeah. It's an astronomical percentage of people it's family related.
Yeah. The ones that are scary, the ones that are from a pervert or whatever, those usually make the national news, and you know they don't do it very often. Then I would say, and we talked about this last episode a bit, start guarding the internet. You say, well, I don't give my kids access to the internet, or I don't give my kids their own smartphone or whatever, and good for you if you don't. However, you're going to go over to family's house, and the other families may not have the same standards you do. You may send your 10-year-old or your 6-year-old over to their cousin's house, and their cousin's 12 or 14, and maybe they have a phone.
Yeah.
And then maybe they say, and the kid says, and the kid will say that, can I see that? And the kids think, well, sure, go ahead. You know, he doesn't know what your policies are.
Yeah.
So make sure that you're super involved with the kids on the internet, and even just setting up policies. You know, there's some good things on the internet and there's some bad things on the internet. If you see these, I need you to come tell me.
Yeah.
I was doing a project with my kids 20 years ago when Google first came out and they didn't have all the controls on it. And I Googled pictures of animals. That was the actual pictures of animals, because we were putting together a science project, and bestiality came up.
Oh gosh.
You know, I thought I almost flipped out of my chair, and but so you don't have to be looking for it to come up.
Yes.
So and then also at that age, there needs to be a growing respect for the gender differences. And I think this is it's sexual. Okay, so boys don't touch girls here, girls don't touch boys here. And quite frankly, boys don't touch boys there, and girls don't touch girls
Yeah,
there as well.
I think it's also important to say boys are boys and girls are girls, and boys can't be boys can't be girls, and girls can't be boys.
Yes, and I think this is particularly important. And write me all the letters you want; I won't even read them. On this issue, I always believe you should teach your boys never hit a girl. Never hit a girl.
Yeah.
Well, what if she hits me? Do not hit her back. There is no excuse in which you hit. Go tell a teacher, go tell me, go do something. But there ought to never be an occasion where a boy hits a girl. And that ought to be just drilled in their head. In things like telling the truth, or a boy should protect a girl if you see somebody bullying, or if you see somebody bullying somebody who's smaller or weaker, or for whatever reason, that you speak up. These are the times for those conversations. Again, they don't have to be long. They can be done in your car while you're driving to school, and ask questions. Well, what will you do if today at school you see that two boys have another guy and they're hitting him? What should you do? What and give them the scenario, and he might say, well, I will run away because I don't want them. Well, that makes sense, but who should you run away to? You start walking them through the steps they should be taking.
One of the things how my dad taught me that, or my brother and sister, when we were younger, he would tell Duke and Butch and Sassy Molassy stories.
Yes.
And Duke and Butch were the bad kids, and Sassy Molassy.
I did the same thing with my
Chris,
kids. Yep.
Ben, and Trisha, there's the three oldest, and he would tell stories of ethical decisions that the kids started doing, and Ben and Chris and Trisha were always the good kids that made the right decisions, and Duke and Butch and Sassy Molassy made the bad decisions. But those stories echoed in my mind.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't always have to be a lecture. It can be storytelling that captivates their imagination.
Yeah, and you don't have to be the world's best storyteller.
Yeah.
All stories are fascinating to kids. Or tell stories of things that happened when you were growing up. When I was a little boy, this is what happened.
Yeah.
All right, so then you go to that later elementary, or to the age that sometimes they call tweens. And that's when you probably start having those birds and bees talks. And again, you don't have to get into the graphics of it. And again, my kids are older. It's harder today than it was even for women, because the problem is you need to be on top of what they're teaching their kids at school. Now, by the way, I also believe this. If you find out that your school is teaching values or giving sexual education prematurely, then I would pull my kid out of the school, either at least for those courses or for that day or permanently. I got pulled out of the sex education classes when I was in 7th grade because my parents didn't approve of the way it was being taught. And you say, oh, wasn't it traumatic? Yeah, but I got over it. I had to go sit in the library with about 3 other kids from my class. And we had a good time in the library. But the reality is my parents were protecting me for information they did not feel I was ready for. But that's when you do have that birds. And you say, oh, I don't know how to do this. Well, ignorance is no excuse for disobedience. And this is a parent's opportunity. Get a book. There are plenty of good
I was going to say, there's so many different. Look at Christian Family Life, Focus on the Family, Passport to Purity, whatever it is. There's
read the book together.
Yeah, they have this whole, they have things so mapped out. All you've got to do is press the button to play the video and ask the questions. It's very simple.
And be a grown-up about it, too. It's not a wee-wee. Call it a penis. That's what it is, right? Because they need to know those terms properly and appropriately. And they're going to ask questions, and answer questions that are appropriately to be asked, but never let them be personal.
Yeah.
If your kid wants to know questions about mistakes you've made, or, do you and mommy? Well, the bottom line is the information they needs to be reserved for that age of where they're at, and realize everybody who was born because a dad and a mom got together, and you explain it to them, and then some will ask questions, and some will be like mortified and horrified, and others, you can get a variety of responses. But other things are temptations. What do you do when somebody wants you to do this? Well, they want you to sneak out of the house at night. What if they want you to get into a car and they don't have a driver's license? What if they want you to take a drink of something, but you don't know what's in it?
Right.
What if they want you to smoke?
Or take a pill, or
take a pill's a big one, because that'll kill them today. And you have to go through each of these scenarios very, very carefully. What kind of friends you should have. And this is a really important one: puberty onset. And I used to have this happen because I was a junior high teacher, and it would make me so furious that sometimes they would not let a young lady know about their first menstrual cycle,
Mm,
and they would have it in class.
mm,
And they were unprepared for this, and it would terrify them. My wife often had to deal with that because she taught down the hall from me. Don't let that happen to your daughter, and
mm.
understand, because all the chemicals and milk and everything, it's happening earlier and earlier.
Mhm.
Prepare your kids for
Yeah.
those times. Even your boys. I recently had a conversation with a young boy who just simply said, "My dad didn't tell me anything. I didn't know about nocturnal emissions. I didn't know about
Mm,
masturbation. I
mm,
didn't know about any of these different things." And he was angry.
mm.
He said, "I either had to find out from the school bus or had to look it up on the internet, neither of which are going to give you good
Exactly.
counsel."
Yeah.
So here's another stage and we're almost out of time, but let me urge you to do a rite of passage trip. Now, you did
Mhm.
this and I did this. I
Yep.
got this idea when my kids were little and I was in Washington, D.C. working on my doctorate. And I ran into this little Jewish kid and we were just talking it up on a boat ride to Mount Vernon. And I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" He says, "I'm with my dad." And he said, "How come?" And he said, "Because I just turned 13 and my present was to go anywhere I wanted to with my dad, and I chose Washington, D.C." And at that moment, I said, "I'm going to do the same thing."
Yeah.
So my wife gave our girls a trip anywhere they wanted. I gave the boys a trip anywhere they wanted in the continental United States. It was a week, and we just went and had a good time together, made memories,
Yeah.
and we called it the rite of passage trip.
That's
And
awesome.
they got it when they were 13. And this during a coming of age trip, that maybe you take them away for 2 or 3 days, like you
Mhm.
mentioned in our last episode, and you talk about a deep topic as well as have some fun, go hiking,
Yep.
go fishing, go
Yep.
swimming, all those things. Then when they're teenagers, you got to start talking about things like pornography, how to choose a spouse, how to date. What does it mean to be a Christian man,
Mm.
manhood and womanhood, drugs and drinking at a deeper level, how to pick
Absolutely.
a college, how do you respond to your own sexual temptations,
Yep.
how do you choose a career, when should you start working, how do you work, do you get there on time, do you do more than you're supposed to, having a good work ethic, getting out of bed on your own.
Mm.
All of these that I just whipped through real quickly are intentional, prioritized conversations that we should be having with our kids because they're not going to pick them up accidentally.
Amen. Man, Dan, that was really good. That was awesome. I hope that
And as always, I take my time during the first half and then I blitz
well, you
through
know
the
what?
last
What we
60
could do is
seconds.
we could go back and revisit that last section because I think it'd be worth having a deeper conversation about.
Conversations with teenagers, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a milestones with teenagers, even young adults when they're in college and beyond college. So, great episode. I hope that if you're a parent or a soon to be parent, that you will keep these in mind. Have a conversation with your spouse and think through how you want to be intentional and disciple the kids in your own home. This has been another conversation here at Life Talks. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.